Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, August 27th, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about the North Carolina Senate race and a brand new poll coming out today from YouGov yesterday, actually talking about Donald Trump's approval rating in this state and the way that voters view candidates like Michael Whatley, the presumptive Republican nominee for Senate in North Carolina, and Roy Cooper, the presumptive Democratic nominee, the former governor who had served in this state as Attorney General and then governor for an extended period of time. They are up for an election against each other in November of 2026, and a lot of eyes are growing on the 2026 Senate races as opportunities arise for Democrats across the country and are more localized in states like North Carolina, Maine, Ohio, and a few others the Democrats are exploring. But an important part of the North Carolina Senate race is how much we've already entered into the general election season. Typically speaking, these primaries take months. They go on and on and on and often are more competitive than you think. But in North Carolina, with an endorsement from Donald Trump, Michael Whatley, the former RNC chair who served alongside Donald Trump's daughter-in-law, has received the endorsement of the incumbent president in this race, ultimately clearing the field on the GOP side. And it never really was a competitive contest on the Democratic side. The only other major Democrat to run for Senate, and this was before Roy Cooper decided to get into the race, dropped out and endorsed him almost immediately after his entrance into the race. And so what we are looking at in terms of North Carolina's Senate race is that the numbers for Donald Trump don't look amazing, which ultimately makes it even better for Democrats as they go into an election where they, for the first time in a long time, start out with the upper hand. Now, for a bit of background and context to North Carolina's Senate race, North Carolina has not had a Senate race in a strong year for the Democratic Party since 2008. That actually is the last time the Democrats won a Senate race in the state of North Carolina. That was Senator Kay Hagan ran against Elizabeth Dole in the Senate race in 2008 and won that race against an incumbent Republican by quite a bit. Obama also won the state on the presidential level. The House elections across the country looked very good for the Democratic Party. So it is quite telling that Democrats have not been able to win in North Carolina, barring blue wave years. The 2026 might just be the year that they are able to do it. And like I said, the national environment hasn't been super conducive to Democrats picking up seats in the U.S. Senate. They are on defense in states that were competitive in the last cycle. States like New Hampshire and Georgia and Michigan and Minnesota, and by an extended branch, states like New Mexico and Colorado. Now, generally speaking, Democrats are hoping, praying that they're able to hold on to all the states I just mentioned. Because if they do not, the chances of winning the Senate majority by the end of the decade are 0%. In order for Democrats to win Senate control, they have to win 2 seats this cycle. Democrats are often looking to states like Maine and also, and especially, North Carolina. And the reason why they believe that it could be so winnable is because they've gotten Roy Cooper, the former governor of this state, also had served as Attorney General, has never lost a race in his life in North Carolina, who might very well win this race. Democrats knew that they needed to field an A-tier candidate, an S-tier candidate, arguably, in this race. Republicans have Michael Whatley, who might have the endorsement of Donald Trump, but we have to keep in mind, as much as he has the endorsement of Donald Trump, he has never run in an election in his life where voters are making the decision. He ran for RNC chair, but beyond that has no electoral history, and certainly not one that is meant to be revered in the state of North Carolina. But the fundamental reality for Democrats is that North Carolina is, in fact, a red state. Democrats have not won it on the Senate level or the presidential level since 2008. And even then, it was by 14,000 votes. Most recently, Donald Trump defeated Kamala Harris in this state by about 3 percentage points, slightly underperforming his 2016 margin, but nearly tripling his 2020 margin. Donald Trump won by over nearly 200,000 more votes than Kamala Harris, and Democrats look to that and say, North Carolina is not a guarantee. But it certainly is in a better position today than it was earlier on. Knowing that Roy Cooper is going to be this Democratic nominee and knowing that Michael Whatley is going to be this Republican nominee really makes this race quite easy to see how it ends, barring a major change in this cycle. Now, things can fluctuate, but here's what I know. North Carolina is a state that, although it did vote for Donald Trump, did so by about 3 points. And if we look at the electoral past of the Democratic Party in blue wave years, including under Donald Trump's first time in office, they are able to win states that Donald Trump won by 3 points or less, and in some cases, by even more. In 2018, Democrats were able to win in a number of states that Donald Trump had won in the last election. 7 states to be exact. Montana, West Virginia, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. And Democrats came very close in states Donald Trump won, like Florida. They almost won that Senate race. They almost won Texas. They came within single digits in states like Indiana and Missouri, came within 11 points of North Dakota, came within 7 in Mississippi, came within 11 in Tennessee. And that's not to say the same things would happen in 2026. I think that we are in a much more polarized era, and Democrats did have incumbents in Indiana, Missouri, North Dakota in 2018. But it doesn't negate the fact that Democrats certainly were able to win in states that Donald Trump had won by about 3 points in the previous cycle. In fact, a perfect example is the state of Arizona, where Kyrsten Sinema defeated Martha McSally. Both of them served in Congress. At the time, congresswomen running against each other for the Senate race. Kyrsten Sinema now won that race in 2018. Donald Trump won Arizona by 3.5% in the previous cycle. And Arizona didn't have a long history of voting for Democrats on the Senate level. You won't find that it has voted blue in quite a long time in the Senate races here, because the last time it did so was in 1988. And since then, it took 40 years for Democrats to be in a position, or 30 years rather, for Democrats to be in a position where they were able to win it yet again. And although it did come, it took a very, very long time. So 2018 was clearly the moment where Democrats met it in states like Arizona and across the country and were able to overcome Donald Trump's margin in the previous presidential cycle. And like North Carolina, like Arizona rather, North Carolina could very well follow suit. Now, getting into the nitty-gritty, beyond, I just realized I spent way too much time talking about the background, but I promise all of that lead-up is necessary in understanding why these new data points only make the chances less and less likely that Republicans win this Senate race, despite a consistent track record on the GOP front of winning Senate elections back-to-back. 2010, they won. 2014, they won. 2016, they won. 2020, they won. 2022, they won. It is 2026 that might put a halt to all of that. And there's a big reason for it. Right now, it finds that about 45% of North Carolinians approve of the job that Donald Trump is doing. 54% disapprove. Now, based on the numbers he received, that's about a 6-point drop-off. That's roughly in line with the national drop-off we have seen, where the national average has shifted away from the president. And it doesn't just end there. When you compare it to the data that this exact polling group did before, back in March of 2025, Donald Trump's approval rating has dropped on the net about 4 points in terms of just direct approval. But in terms of overall what the spread says, it was +2 in March. It's -9 today. That's an 11-point swing in about half a year. Massive, massive change. That's not great for Donald Trump. In June, Donald Trump was down by 4, and today, being down by 9 only makes it this much more likely that Democrats inch closer and closer to being the very clear favorites in this Senate race and likely to win it in the election. About 60% of independents disapprove of the job that Donald Trump is doing, and that's the problem here. Because Michael Whatley is so much in line with Donald Trump and worked alongside Donald Trump's daughter-in-law, it is very difficult to shake any idea that he might be separate from the agenda and the persona of the incumbent president, which in a state like North Carolina, as much as it did vote for Donald Trump in 2024, 2020, and 2016, take a blue type of electorate that is more, blue wave midterm year, Donald Trump probably would not have won the state of North Carolina. And thinking about Roy Cooper as an individual, well, everybody knows him. Extremely high name ID, running for Senate, ran 4 statewide campaigns back-to-back, where in 2012, Republicans didn't even run an opponent against him because that's how strong he was. Back-to-back-to-back-to-back victories 4 times. Everybody knows his name. His approval rating, 55% across the state. Disapproval rating, 38%. On the overall net spread, that is an 18-point advantage or 17-point advantage for Roy Cooper. A massive, massive advantage, especially in comparison to that of Donald Trump. And not to mention that the approval rating isn't just led by Democrats. 54% of independents say they approve of Roy Cooper. 30% of Republicans agree. Now, that doesn't mean they will vote for him. That's the important part. It just means on the margins, some of these swing voters that are independents might say, I like the job he did as governor. I'd trust him in the U.S. Senate. For these 30% of Republicans that approve of the job that Roy Cooper is doing, I think goes to show that as much as Donald Trump and the GOP of North Carolina have tried to disparage Roy Cooper's image, it clearly isn't working. It is very difficult to build up an appetite to defeat somebody who is so popular. His margin will undoubtedly be very close. Might be one of the closest races of the cycle, but that doesn't mean he won't win. And as Donald Trump starts to find less and less support on his end, it only boosts the idea and the likelihood that Roy Cooper is able to win in this race. Quite fascinating, if you ask me. And so just thinking about the Senate election that is about to take place in a year and a half, or less than that actually, North Carolina might be one of those states where historically it had voted very much for the GOP, but Democrats have the right person for this time, and arguably have the right dynamics of the 2026 midterms. The presidential cycle does not dictate everything. That's why 2018 looked that way. And it isn't just Democrats who are able to do such things. In 2014, it was the Democratic Party that took the 2012 Republican Party that took the 2012 election and made it and put it to shame in terms of the amount of seats that Democrats were winning in 2014. Democrats went from 2012 of a 55 to 45 Senate majority to 2 years later down 54 to 46. Republicans gained 9 seats. 9 seats in the 2014 midterm elections. And often they came in states that Barack Obama rather, did quite well in the presidential. For instance, look at Virginia. Obama won the state by 4. In this case, Mark Warner defeated Ed Gillespie by just 0.81%. In Iowa, Joni Ernst won by a whopping 8.3%. Obama won the state by 6 against Mitt Romney. In Colorado, Cory Gardner defeated Mark Udall. Tom Udall is another U.S. senator from a different state, ran in New Mexico, side by side. Cory Gardner won that race by 1.9%. Obama won Colorado by 5.4%. In other states, too, you have found this to be the case. And that is because even though a state might vote one way on the presidential level, it's not a guarantee that it will vote that way consistently and always, regardless of the midterm cycle. And while Democrats have been historically unlucky in North Carolina, 2026 might be the one they break through. And 18 years later, off their last Senate victory, it honestly is quite time for it to happen. So I'm interested. We're going to keep tracking North Carolina because it stands to be one of the most interesting races of the cycle and one that really throws us for a loop. Because this race should start out with a Republican advantage, just as many of the other races have in years past. And so to see it now, in all its glory that it is, North Carolina, just to me, is something that I find to be really fun to watch, really engaging, and one that I imagine, for the first time in a long time for an opposition party, North Carolina might be more likely for Democrats than a state like Maine. And the margin for Roy Cooper in North Carolina might be larger than an eventual Democratic victory in a state like Maine or potentially even Michigan. We're going to keep our eye on that one. But the point is that the midterm elections in a presidential context is often seen as a referendum on the incumbent president. Donald Trump, who is unpopular today, will be unpopular by November of 2026. And in a state like North Carolina, where his approval rating has gone from being +2 in March to -4 in June to -9 in August, the trend line here is certainly far from amazing. And while I don't think that this means that Cooper wins by 10 to 15 points like Josh Stein did in the 2024 governor's race, I do think it means he's on track for victory. And although that may change, what we have seen unfold over the past 6 months is a continuous decrease in support for the president, not just nationally, but in the states that elected him in the first place. And thinking about 2026, Roy Cooper, who holds a plus 17 approval rating on net, Donald Trump, who's down 9, is more likely to win the Senate race than I think Republicans give him credit for. And while it will not be a slam dunk, it could very well near close to that, depending on how the margins shift. But as of now, the favorite in the 2026 Senate race in North Carolina, former Democratic Governor Roy Cooper, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that voters just simply are displeased and unhappy with the incumbent president, Donald Trump, and it will be reflected at the ballot box come next November. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2026 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.